Hi there, it is Mathew Blades, and welcome to today's episode of Learn from People Who Lived It. I think most of you know that I come from a long history of military people in my family. My grandfather, my father, my brother all served, and today we're going to have a conversation that won't be for everybody. But as I like to say, it will be for the right people. We're going to sit down with Special Forces veteran of the U.S. Army, Jacob Wagner, who served in the SOF, as they call it, the Special Operations Forces, with the 75th Ranger Regiment for his first two deployments. He's going to recount some of the missions he was on, and we are going to have this discussion about the moral injuries he sustained. In today's episode, we're going to talk about moral injury, what it is, how to overcome it. We're going to talk about the years after his deployment and why those were the most challenging. We're also going to have this great conversation about epigenetics, biochemistry, neuroscience, quantum physics, and the impact that has on our minds and bodies. So sit back and get ready for our hour-long conversation with Jacob Wagner right after this. I'd like you to consider for just a moment that more than half of the people who are listening to the sound of my voice will have a heart attack, stroke, or heart failure in their lifetime. However, research shows us that up to 90% of heart disease and stroke is preventable. I think about my own father, who died by heart attack at just 47 years old, and I wonder how much longer he'd be around if we'd just known about Health Span MD. Dr. Todd Hurst, a board-certified cardiologist, is not just my doctor. He's helped thousands of people just like you and me with his approach. HealthSpan MD is the way healthcare is supposed to be. An ongoing partnership between you and your expert healthcare team that guides you step by step on the best opportunities to achieve your health, weight, and longevity goals. Please take a minute and sign up for his 3-step consultation and witness the HealthSpan MD difference for yourself, so you can be here longer for your family and, most importantly, yourself. HealthSpanMD.com. HealthSpan MD, an insurance-based practice. And he looks right at me and he says, Mathew, you are a transitional character in your lineage. And that is why I do what I do. Hi there, my name is Mathew Blades, podcast host and motivational speaker, and I love keynoting and putting on workshops to help people understand the value of self-care. Because there are people in this room that feel broken, but you're not. There is nothing wrong with you. Just like there was nothing wrong with me. I just needed to step into my life's purpose more, and that's what I want to encourage you to do. Let's do this together. Head on over to learnfrompeoplewholivedit.com. Now, let's get to today's podcast.
Looking for no bullshit conversation about mental health? Find Learn from People Who Lived It wherever you get podcasts. Search it using all one word. Learn from People Who Lived It.
Welcome to another episode of Learn from People Who Lived It.
Hi, my name is Jacob Wagner. I am 40 years old, and I am here to talk about finding hope in a hopeless place.
Who do you hope hears this?
Anyone who is struggling and going through some extremely difficult times, and it's very dark, and they are not able to see the light or a way out. And I'm here to let them know that there is light at the end of the tunnel. And even if they don't see any at the tunnel, that you can move through the darkness and come out the other side better for it.
I cannot wait to get into this conversation today. Welcome everybody to Learn from People Who Lived It. Up in the upper right is my good buddy, Dr. David Lykin. Good afternoon, sir.
Pleasure as always, Matt.
We are about to have an incredible conversation with Jacob Wagner, who you just heard is a former military man. He got out of this service in 2006, but then interestingly, he calls 2007 to 2013 the hardest years. And I have a suspicion on a couple of these things, but welcome to our podcast, Jacob. How are you in this moment, right here, right now?
Thank you. It's great to be here. Things are in a really good place right now. May not be able to see it, but I'm usually grinning ear to ear. I'm just filled with a lot of happiness, true joy, and gratitude for just continuing to live each and every day to its most.
What would the Jacob in 2007 have said to the Jacob in 2023 who said, I'm happy, I'm usually smiling all the time, life is good?
Wouldn't have believed it. Didn't think it was possible. Not even close to a realm of possibility, because there was nothing to be happy or joyous about in 2007.
Well, we're going to get to all that stuff in just a little bit. For those that listen to our podcast, often you know that I like to start with the first 10 years of somebody's life. I think it gives us a really good lens into kind of the way you were wired. So if you don't mind, Jacob, what did the first 10 years of your life look like? Mom, dad, brothers, sisters, where you living? What's going on in the world?
Sure. First 10 years, I am the oldest of myself and a younger brother who's 3 years younger. Parents grew up in Wyoming. So technically I was born in Wyoming. First 3 years were there. And dad grew up on a farm. Both my parents, college educated. My mom has 2 masters, did degrees in Wyoming. Didn't have really many opportunities. She was a teacher and a music instructor, so decided to move to Phoenix when I was 3, and I pretty much grew up in Mesa and Gilbert those first 10 years, and played a lot of sports. My parents were extremely supportive. I had very loving parents. Didn't have any, didn't really have any issues with parents like growing up or anything. Had a pretty idealistic upbringing those first 10, 18 years.
One of the first people ever, Dave, to make that announcement, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of times the childhood stuff plays into some of the adult struggles later on.
Well, there's a whole different set of things that we're going to jump into here in just a couple of moments. When do you, or how old are you when you decide that you want to join the military?
18. Not the, my parents were actually, they were away in vacation to Hawaii. And I was at a point where I had soccer scholarships to go play Division I soccer, but was not really interested in the sport anymore. Wanted a new adventure. My parents had said that I wouldn't appreciate a college education unless I paid for it myself. So I knew they weren't going to pay for everything. I didn't want to do the scholarships. And a military guy had talked to me at school. And before I knew it, I was signing paperwork. And I remember when I signed that paperwork, he's like, out of all the people I've ever talked to, he's like, you were absolutely the last person I would have thought that would have joined the military. He's like, I know you're going to be a lifer. And I was just kind of like, nah, I don't think that's the case. But that also happened to be 10 days before 9/11 is when I actually went into the military. And so I really had no idea what I was getting into.
Were you must have been terrified to see 9/11 happen almost from a different angle of like, holy shit, like now I might have to do this thing for real. Like I really might get in the thick of things.
Yeah, that's the crazy thing is that 9/11 happened. I had 2 drill sergeants. One actually served as a ranger in Mogadishu back in '93. And I didn't even see, I was in training. I didn't even see the towers hit until a year and a half after, because I was in training that entire time and it wasn't a focus. And so my perception of what that was very different than everyone else. But the way that message was conveyed to us was like, hey, everyone's going to be going to war. And so my mindset had changed from like, oh, I'm going to go be maybe a computer guy, get some networking skills, and go live in Germany, jump out of a plane, get paid an extra $3-4 grand to do this. And I'll have a pretty chill, cushy experience, serve my country. But once 9/11 happened, it became very clear. It's like, oh, well, everyone's going to war. And it was treated like that because both of our drill sergeants, one of them at least, had served in Mogadishu and is very familiar with combat. And so things ramped up from there and took a completely different turn that was unexpected.
When that happened, did you find yourself wishing that you'd accepted one of those D1 scholarships to play soccer?
Ironically, no. It didn't even cross my mind until we were doing a combat jump into Iraq in 2003. But in that moment in basic training, it was just, you call it authoritarian figures that were over me, that it just seemed like my duty to honor and country was to serve in the most capacity. And in that moment, it was just like, these terrorists, we got to get these terrorists. And there wasn't anything outside of that really.
Interesting. When did the special forces or special operations come into play for you?
Yeah. So, I kind of mentioned the drill sergeant served in Mogadishu, and I ended up graduating the top of my class. And I remember they pulled me aside after graduation and said like, hey, we want to have a conversation. All they had done was yell at me this entire thing. I didn't even think they were real human beings. And they had pulled me aside like a normal person and had a conversation. I was actually more shocked that they were talking to me like a normal person instead of yelling at me. And they had said like, hey, our country needs guys that can serve in the Ranger Regiment, that can go into the Special Forces community. And like, you have those skills, and we think that you should change your contract and do a Ranger indoctrination contract and go down the Special Forces route. And so, of course, at that moment, that was like, oh my God, these people that I learned to have this unbelievable respect for, it was like they wanted me to go down this path. And so they helped me change my contract. And so then before I knew it, I ended up going to airborne school and going through the Ranger Ranger school and going down the special operations path. And it took about a year and a half to get through everything. But that's really what kind of set me on that path, was their mindset that that's where I needed to go. And ironically, in 2003, we got into Iraq on my first combat deployment. And I ended up running into that drill sergeant before we were in Saudi Arabia, and he was working for another unit. And it was just this unbelievable conversation that we had. It only lasted a couple minutes because we were, this was before the initial invasion happened, but was like super proud. And, we kind of caught up, told him where I was, what I was doing. And he knew where we were going and what we were doing. And so it was kind of like a validation for him of like, he was super excited, at that moment. And it was a moment of excitement, but at the same time, I really had no idea what I was about to do in the next couple days.
Dave, you must have seen this because I know you were a psychiatrist who was working with trauma for the last 20 some odd years, and you almost had like a front row seat to these men and women as they were coming back from these first and second deployments. And was there a common theme that you noticed amongst some of these soldiers, Dave?
With the special ops guys, and the Marines in particular, you're trained to just suck up the adversity and not flinch over it. And so when you leave the military theater and get back into civilian life, that transition period is oftentimes very difficult because maybe you're not sleeping, maybe you're getting jumpy, maybe you're having trouble dealing with crowds, going into supermarkets and things like that. And the thought of stopping and asking for help is usually the farthest thing from people's minds. You just embrace the suck, you keep pushing forward, you kind of hope that it's going to eventually settle down. And then if it doesn't, usually there's a family member or somebody that intervenes and says, wait a second, things should have been settling down by now, and they're not, so now it's time to do something different.
That's interesting. How many tours did you do in total?
3.
How were you after the first one?
I hadn't had time to process everything that happened. I'll never forget the first time that we had done the initial, there was a few combat jumps that our unit had done, and there was a number of enemy KIA that happened, but you're so trained, it's just part of it. But it wasn't until the phone or the radio call came over that we had 3 guys that were killed, and it was because of a suicide female bomber. And that was when, I just get chills thinking about it now. Everything went different, and it was that was the moment that was like holy shit, this is real. This is real. And of course, I was a few kilometers away from where it had actually happened. So in that moment, I didn't know who it was. And so then in my brain, I'm just kind of processing who it was and everything. But all of that, there was never really time to process it. Days later, we had a short memorial service, but then you're just day in and day out, just doing mission after mission after mission, that you don't have time to process it. And even I didn't have time to even think about that stuff really until we started our flight back. And we were on our flight back. They ended up having, a brand new aircraft. It was ended up flying first class. And I just remember sitting there, and I had a uniform on still. And I mean, I had sweat, blood. There was just garbage all over me. I only had 2 uniforms. And I remember sitting there, and this flight attendant walked by asking, if I wanted anything to drink. And, if it was just kind of like this bizarre, 2 days ago, I'm doing missions, and now I'm being extracted. And I couldn't make sense of everything that was going on. I had so many emotions, but the only thing that made sense was that I just wanted to drink. And so, we all just kind of drank it up until, I think we went to Germany, Spain, and then back. And it just ended up being a lot of drinking. There wasn't processing. And then when you get back to the stateside, I remember like our command, they want you to answer a couple questions, and those questions, it's like if there were any issues with answering these questions, we were quarantined for, I don't know if it was 3 days, 5 days or something. And then we had to answer these questions in there to get out. Nobody really wanted to, answer questions the way that they really felt. They wanted to answer questions to get the hell out of quarantine, so we could just, get out, go meet up with our families, and basically go drink it up with the boys. And so there just really wasn't time to process things, and there wasn't what I would consider a quality opportunity to really help the soldiers understand what was going on. Because even the command, the people in charge at that time, it was basically, for lack of better words, like if you had getting a PTSD, I didn't even know what PTSD was at the time. I don't even think I ever heard what that was. But there was this psychological thing that, like, if you couldn't put 2 in his chest and 1 of his head, you were a pussy, you don't belong with us. And so you had to have this macho type mentality, and everybody carried that.
What do you want to say, Dave? I can just see the wheels spinning.
He's chomping at the bit.
I know, I can.
I hope they change that. I hope they changed that, because I've heard that from a bunch of other folks. You're eager to get back with your family, and they give you the questionnaire, and whether you're still staying in or not, the incentive of being stuck behind for an extra week or so, doing psychological evaluations, when all your friends are out already. There's a very strong incentive to just say, nope, everything's good, everything's fine, sleeping great, no anxiety, not worried about anything, check, and get the hell out. Mm-hmm. So there's really not a mechanism for reasonably addressing some of the issues that people commonly deal with. And it's basically physiology, right? So it's not a matter of being weak-minded or having a flaw. When you go from being around threats 24/7 to now all of a sudden everything is quiet. How many times was it quiet in a town, and it was quiet because something bad was about to happen, right? Everybody cleared out, and that's why it was quiet. So when you're on the civilian side of things and things are quiet as they should be, it almost heightens your senses. Like you're just like ramping up, waiting for the next thing to happen. And that's pretty much a normal reaction to things, but it doesn't fit very well in civilian life. And so a lot of what people call PTSD and a lot of what people struggle with is not so much that something is wrong. It's just that it's a normal reaction to life-threatening situations applied to a situation that's not threatening.
So 2 questions for you, Jacob. Number 1, did you know any of those 3 people that were killed that day? And then secondly, how long was the time between your first and your second tour?
Yeah. So out of the 3 guys, 2 of them I really didn't know. 1 I went through all of my indoctrination training with, so definitely did know. Not like best friends or anything. Sure. But you work around guys long enough, and there's a camaraderie that goes with it. And it was the first guy that was killed out of all the guys that I went through. There was another one that happened later down the road, but that was very shocking, very, very shocking. And out of the 3 guys, one of them was married with kids, and so you kind of start to. I didn't know what to call it at the time. I didn't know it was an issue, but there's the survivor's guilt that goes with that. Of it's like, oh my God, like I'm not married, I don't have kids. This came down the road when you're kind of processing things of like, well, what, like why wasn't it me? It should have been me. like you start to think about like, man, this guy has all these people to provide for in the family. And you would think it would be something that the single guy that doesn't have, that immediate family like that to provide for, that you would hope that it would be you. But, in a lot of these cases, in my exposure anyways, that was not what happened.
How long was it then before you go back?
Oh, yeah. So the second question there, let's see, 2003. I came back. I was only gone for a few months in 2003. And then later in 2003, I went to Afghanistan for my first Afghanistan deployment. So we're talking maybe 4 or 5 months. Let's see, November, April, May, maybe May to November, whatever that is.
Which one of these tours changes you profoundly, and why?
Yeah. There were different things that happened in each one. And I think there were things that mounted. I would say the third one was the absolute worst though. And that was because there was more what I now consider and call moral and ethical traumas. By my first 2 deployment, I was working with a regular special operations group. By my 3rd deployment, I was working for a special missions unit within Joint Special Operations Command, and ended up working directly on all of our missions with a CIA Special Activities Division officer. And so I started to see things in a different light. And I had a lot of questions. And I remember when we came back from a mission, my one commander, we were having a conversation, and I had just asked him about some things that happened on the objective and with the CIA's involvement. And he was like, Wagner, he's like, you don't get fucking paid to ask questions. He's like, you get paid to kick down a fucking door. And it was just kind of like, ooh. And I would probably say that in the nicest way possible now. But in that moment, there was a lot of anger that came from, his end, that this would even be a question that I would even vocalize. And so there was quite a few things that happened in that deployment that ended up making it really bad. There was special forces guys at that moment in time in those deployments. I think that there was like $1 million bounty on heads of the SF guys at the point. And so, and they, the insurgent, everyone in that area, they know who you are. I mean, you look very distinct compared to the rest of the regular military. Everyone's got beards. They have different types of uniforms, different guns, different vehicles. So I was more aware of kind of the implications of things that we were doing, and more aware of like, man, any day now, something could happen to me. Every deployment that I was on, we had guys that were killed. My second deployment, we had a Black Hawk go down that killed everyone but 3 guys on board. And it's just like you're expecting death. And, it starts to get to the point where it was just kind of like, man, any day, it could be any day. And it's just a weird mindset on that 3rd deployment.
I want to ask you, Dr. Dave, while I can here, but, because what's probably happening and being formed in the brain as you're living a life where every day you think it's possible you're going to die.
Well, Jake, you can tell me if this has been your experience, but from different stories that I've heard from other people, when that really settles in, you just do your job. You just try not to think about it. So you go from, one mission to the next, and you just every day you just say, okay, today could be my last day, and you just stop worrying about it. It doesn't really hit you typically until after you're out of that theater.
Mm-hmm.
Is that your experience, Jacob?
Yeah, that's definitely accurate. I think the awareness of the amount of death there was, I was exposed to a lot of death on the 3rd deployment. And I think I realized how fragile things were. But I think the full implications of exactly what Dave was saying, like fully understanding what that really meant, didn't come until later. And I think even a lot of the things that I'm talking about now, these, hindsight's 2020, and I've been through quite a bit, and I'm able to kind of verbalize what a lot of these, feelings were. But in the moment, everything was pretty messy. And then your focus was I should say my focus at least, you're so zeroed in on just day to day, mission in, mission out. And in like life, I mean, life was actually probably, I don't want to say the easiest, but it was so simple that there were just only so many things that I had to do that day. And there were so many things I didn't have to worry about. And so you just focus on those things, mission, these high value targets that we're going after. And there really isn't time to process anything else, and you're not sleeping much. So when you do get a free minute, like you're pretty much taking a nap or, doing maybe some type of a workout or getting some food, but resting when you can. And so there really just wasn't time to kind of process all those emotions that were going on. Did you ever get close to being killed? I wouldn't say for me, I don't feel, we've had a number of RPGs that were shot like at our vehicles and stuff that didn't hit. So it's kind of like, could you have been like, oh, maybe if, the vehicle was a little farther, maybe 100 feet this way or something. And I've been in convoys where there's been IEDs that have gone off, but I just like, for me, it didn't feel like I always, my area of expertise was communication. And so I was always with the commander and relaying information between the teams and going back to our tactical operations command center. And so it was almost like I was observing a lot of the time, even though I was in the middle of the mess. I wonder if you would be able to articulate, kind of earlier I teed you up, like, was there a moment that profoundly changed you? And you said it was in that third tour. Was there a sequence of events that you will share with us that were incredibly life-changing for you? Yeah. It's funny because it's like a story that I've always I felt more comfortable saying in person to people, but I'd always been leery about saying it out in the open, recording and stuff, because I was so deathly afraid of the CIA for so many years. But there was an incident where it became very clear that after a certain, when some of these raids would happen, there would be heroin that would be found, and started noticing a pattern of when it was over a certain amount that there would be an aircraft from CIA that would come in and they would pick that up, and it would go to another location. And that was kind of when I started asking these bigger questions of like, why is this not being blown up? Why is this not being destroyed? This amount is going somewhere. And being the communications guy and having access to basically all the communications between all the groups that we work with the Special Operations Command under Joint Special Operations Command, I was able to see things that most people weren't able to see, and piecing things together with what I would consider limited but more privileged information than most people. And it became clear to me that there was a lot more going on with the drug trade than what I initially realized or even believed at the time. And so that kind of made me more question of, what's the real purpose are we in Afghanistan for? Like, what was really going on in Iraq? I was told that we were there for these weapons of mass destruction. And a lot of the things that I saw, I questioned. There are people that said they were there for oil. And so then the narrative of the reasons why being there started to make me question, like, what am I really doing versus being told repeatedly what I am doing. And so that's where I started to question things. I didn't question things until really my third deployment. And I feel like that started really having some negative effects at the time, but now it really helped me to start process all of these traumas, not just the physical things. I mean, you start to see enough dead bodies, like you become desensitized to it, and you joke about it. But then there are these moral and ethical traumas that I didn't even know existed, that I found that I had questioned for many years later, and trying to get answers as life went on. And things that even compounded that was that I had another guy that I worked with, two guys that I worked with that came back from an Afghanistan deployment. I forget what year it was, 2006, 2007. and one committed suicide in the other's house. One got blamed for the murder, and it turned into a big issue. The guy that got blamed for the murder, his dad was extremely high within the agency, within CIA, and there ended up being some murder trials that came out about it, and that split guys. It didn't split the guys, but the agency had their fingers in things. The person who was trying the case, the prosecutor, needed to make the case. The guy that committed suicide, his dad was a bureau chief for the Associated Press. And so, and then one guy was, the guy that died was black, the other guy was white. And so this happened in Washington, D.C., Baltimore area. And so there were these other compounding factors that added onto my deployments, that everything was so hush hush. You really, even though you work in this small, tight-knit special ops community, you really never know who was on your team. And you had to be careful with what you said, because it could come back and be twisted. These words could be used against you. And that became very clear in my third deployment. So as time went on with these murder trials, I started having even more questions and had more issues. And anytime I would speak out against anyone within the agency and the things that they had done with things that I was exposed to, there would be conversations that would be had that were not direct, but they were indirect in letting me know that basically if there were things that I would say, that there would be repercussions. But it was said in the most nonchalant, indirect way that you're trying to decipher what exactly they're saying, but you know exactly what they're saying. And so then that is just more levels of complication on top of these moral and ethical traumas. That the murder, there was a second murder trial that happened in 2012, and that's when it kind of put me over the edge, where I had come to the realization that there were a lot of traumas that I just hadn't dealt with. I needed more answers. And that's when I kind of went off on my spiritual journey for a while.
So Jake, are you familiar with the concept of moral injury?
To an extent, just like general definition, I think. Right.
So from my experience working with a lot of people that were dealing with PTSD, and I had a sampling of veteran patients that were Vietnam era, right? So they dealt with combat decades ago, and the folks that never really seemed to make a lot of progress, medications didn't help them, psychotherapy, cognitive therapy and stuff like that around PTSD, the typical PTSD things didn't work. The folks that never really seemed to progress were the folks that had a moral injury that they just couldn't talk about, or that they just couldn't work through. And so that keeps everything alive every day, and people struggle with guilt, and they rehash it in their minds. Should I have said something? Is it better that I didn't say anything? Let me just try to forget about it. No, I can't forget about it because it keeps coming back. So that kind of internal struggle can keep a lot of the PTSD stuff alive and make it very resistant to treatment. And just for the viewers that aren't familiar with the idea of moral injury, we know what physical injuries are, right? So if you get hit by something, if you get shot, you damage tissue. Sometimes, things get damaged in a way that they don't heal properly, and there's long-term pain issues associated with it. But the idea of moral injury is, you have an internal code that you live by. If some folks grow up in a religious environment, and so they have that. But even just, basic human interactions, just basic respect for other people, other people's humanity, you have a code that you live by. And when you see something or experience something, or you're forced to participate in something that goes strongly against that, it causes a rip. If you don't figure out a way to address it and to find some healing in it, that can become the splinter that just causes pain, like I said, indefinitely until you deal with it. For some people, it's a spiritual journey, seeking forgiveness. Some people, go through whatever their religious tradition is, talk to a priest, talk to a pastor, work through some forgiveness. Sometimes it can be cognitive, just kind of understanding what your role was in the situation, and that you were in a no-win situation, and, there really was no good answer. It was just which was the least bad of the bad choices that were there, and coming to some level of acceptance of the situation. And for a lot of people, healing doesn't complete until you have some form of restitution. And you can't go back and change things that have happened. You can't undo the things that you saw. So, to work that through, a lot of times people find other things, like, in other words, that because of the things that you experienced, you have a level of insight and a knowledge of the world that kind of directs your choices going forward. Maybe you might get involved with a charity, or you might get involved with helping other people in a certain way. And that drive to do that kind of comes out of that healing process.
Isn't it worth saying, both of you, that, like when you break your leg, they put a cast on it, the leg heals and it gets back together. But you can't unsee your friend being killed. You can't unsee kicking down a door and having to, blow away a few people. You can't unsee those things.
Yeah, but Matt, there's even more to it than that. I mean, there are sometimes that you're put in situations where you're commanded to do something that you don't feel is the right thing to do. You're asked to go on a mission that, morally you think is the wrong choice. Now, what do? You're deployed. You're there to do a job. As your sergeant or whoever it was said, you're not paid to think, you're paid to do your job. Okay. But that doesn't mean that you stop having feelings about it, or that sense of whether the issue is right or wrong goes away just because you're there to do a job.
Yeah.
Is that
and
true for you?
Yeah, just to even add to that, even another layer of complexity. Everything that you said really resonates and it makes sense. Before I had done my initial invasion to Iraq, our units, when I was in the Ranger Regiment, that had been deployed multiple times to like Afghanistan already. And when I had got into the unit, there was a guy that was actually a conscientious objector. And this guy, nice guy, really smart guy, already had a master's degree, really smart, but he was treated like trash by like the command and everyone because he refused to deploy again and kill anyone. And it was such a weird thing for me to even interact with the guy, because he was like this, like someone that I would just be friends with, like a genuinely like nice guy. And then like seeing the things that was happening to him, it was such a dichotomy in my brain that it was like, man. But looking back on it going forward, that then reinforced any type of doubt that you would have. It's like, even if you wanted to say anything, which there was never a point where I actually would have wanted to come out and say something like he did. Even if I did, it was already, there was this picture painted of like what would happen to you, and, going down this path of possibly having charges against you, getting kicked out of the military, and just being treated like trash by everyone.
So you get out in 2006. You say to us that the toughest years were between 2007 and 2013. What's kind of happening in that 5 years for you, bro?
Yeah, what really triggered everything for me to even start dealing with things was I ended up getting picked up for a DUI. I had cannabis in the car. I ended up I had lived in Florida at the time, and I had come back to Phoenix, and I was in Phoenix for a number of months, but there was a speeding ticket, or no, some type of a ticket that wasn't, that got paid, but it didn't register as paid in the system in Florida. So when I got picked up in Arizona, I ended up getting charged with like 4 felonies. And that was unbelievable to me because it was talking about like a year and a half in prison type of a thing. And there were some things that needed worked out. I just, it was really hard to kind of believe process. At that time, I had believed in the court system, and, I didn't know anything about the court system. But I remember I showed up to the court, and I had the conversation with the judge, and I didn't have anyone representing me, and that was the first arraignment that happened. And as I walked out, there was a attorney that pulled me aside and was like, he's like, I can't believe you don't have anyone representing you. And he's like, you know, I'm a former special forces officer. And he's like, I'm your representation now. Guy ended up representing me. Yeah, I mean, it ended up working out in my favor. It wouldn't have been for him. Like, I mean, it would have been a different path for me for sure. But the DUI and having those charges is what woke me up. Passport was revoked, couldn't leave the country, had to stay here, and actually had to deal with things. And that's when I went to the VA, because my family, it was like everyone in my life could see it. They're like, you are not right. Everybody could see it. And it was like, to me, it seemed like I was the only sane person and everybody else had the problems because they had no idea what was going on in the world. And then I went to the VA, and I remember sitting down with somebody, and they had this sheet, and they asked me these questions on a sheet, and I checked like these boxes, yes, no. And I kind of just went there to check the box for my family to say I went to the VA. And this lady, when I went to leave, she said, you know, I really want you to think about these answers. Like, you said this, like, these are what these answers mean. And it was like, it was pretty much, I checked every box for having the symptoms of PTSD. And that was the first time that it hit me in the face that it was like, oh my God, like I have a problem. And it was like before, it wasn't even in the realm of possibility that I had a problem, but that's when it kind of clicked. And then it's like, okay, like it really hit me. It gave me a chance to process what was going on. And that's when I started seeking, you know, the clinical help, psychological help with the VA. And, you know, it made a lot of progress with it, but it only took me so far. What I really needed was some deeper spiritual healing for those moral and ethical traumas. Because now with, you know, what Dave was saying, it really makes sense, because those were the things that bothered me the most and I had the biggest issue with.
Yeah.
Of course.
Like you can't get an infection out until you remove the foreign body. And when you have a moral injury, it's like that foreign body in your soul that just constantly causes that irritation and keeps everything alive. But I'm curious to hear about the spiritual journey. How did you work through some of this stuff? Sorry, Matt, I'm sorry. I'm taking over.
No, I love it. Drive the ship, baby. Let's go.
Yeah. And so the, you know, between 2007 to 13, I'd been in the National Center for Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder, Traumatic Brain Injury. There was I think a 2.5-month hospital stay in 2008, I think. And then I went back again in 2011 for like another 1-month stay. And that really helped me. The first time it was like, hey, here's all your issues. Here is a bag of tools. And then it was like, you have all these tools to now work on all these issues. And that was helpful. And it helped me start to move through. It was extremely hard work. Oh my God, was it painful, because I had to reprogram how my brain thought when I would walk into a room and all I am doing is processing threats. Everything is about processing threats. And looking back on it, it was like, oh my God, no wonder I was so exhausted, but couldn't sleep because all I did was process threats everywhere. So those tools with the VA helped. I did a lot of outpatient stuff, but it got me to a point where I could get back in school. And I did my first degree that I finished, I think just an AA degree in 2012. But the murder trial really dug up more of those moral and ethical traumas in 2012, the end of 2012. And I just hit my limit where it's like, you know, I can't pretend that I don't have these other traumas that can't be, that the VA can't, you know, fix. And so then that's when I dove off into the spiritual stuff. And it's like, all right, I got to figure out this God box. And I grew up on the Western Christian side of things. And so I went down figuring out Christianity and doing my research. And it's like, okay, everything came from Catholicism. Like, I need to go into Catholicism. And so I ended up becoming a monk on the Catholic side for a couple years and learned a ton. But as I progressed and I started this healing process, I started having a lot of out-of-body experiences. And in these out-of-body experiences, when I would have these conversations with my priest superiors, they would basically like, you know, it would be a conversation of like trying to convince me that they would say what I was having was like evil or it wasn't, you know, natural type of a thing. And it was almost like, it's like, wow, I'm having these experiences and I'm looking at this green grass, and you're literally trying to convince me this green grass is purple when like it's very clear to me it's green because I have experience through this. And so it got to the point where I ended up leaving the Catholic side and went off to the Buddhist side. And that's where I started learning a lot about the subtle energy bodies, learned a lot about the practical application of quantum physics and how that kind of coincided with neuroscience, and being able to tap into my autonomic nervous system. And through epigenetics, I was able to learn how to start turning genes off and on through meditation at will. And that's what really started my healing process through physically healing, but also on the emotional, like my emotional body, and being able to learn how to clear the energies out. Because as I went through it and I worked through what I would call an energy healer, most people would understand now, was working with an energy healer, that it was like a surgeon that was helping me go through and removing these emotional traumas. And in order to remove these traumas, I had to be willing to let go of them because I was holding on to them. And so then it was learning about letting them go and releasing them. And there's a lot of different techniques. There's quite a few techniques that you can use for letting go of these. I mean, there's some amazing tools. I'm sure Dave probably knows. There's some amazing tools now that quantum physics has introduced into the medical community, to where these different emotions and these traumas can register now. They can pick up these subtle energies, and you can have somebody help you work through it through a technological standpoint. And so there ended up being some integration of the technology that happened with it too, that helped me move through. I feel like there's a lot of different ways I could go in talking about those experiences, because there were so many different types of experiences. And then even it got to the point where the Buddhist side, it became very clear that I had learned a ton of these different areas, and it was time for me to move on. And it became very clear that it was more important to have monks without a monastery than it was to have monks in a monastery, just because of where like the human evolution is going and like the path forward. It became very clear for me to leave, and there ended up being some helpful process for me to kind of leave the monastery life, but that was not something that I wanted to do.
You've used some words in here that I think people would be interested to learn a little bit more about. You said epigenetics at one point. Help people understand what that is.
Do you want me to take a stab at it?
Yeah, talking about the modification of gene expressions. Yeah. I'm sure you can.
Right. So the genetics is the actual DNA code that you have. So everybody has chromosomes in every cell. Every cell in the body has the same chromosomes in it. But what makes a liver cell different from a heart muscle cell, different from a white blood cell, is which genes are turned on or turned off at the moment. So you have the entire library for running any type of cell that's in the body, but you turn them on and turn them off as needed. And as cells interact with each other, and as certain chemicals and hormones in the body interact, and other small molecules, they turn on and off different genes for expression. So epigenetics is the science of the turning on and turning off of specific genes at specific times. How
do you do it? What is the benefit?
I was introduced when I left and I came back to Phoenix to do new degrees at Arizona State University, new sustainability science degree, and then I did an MBA. And when I came back, I got in a pretty bad accident. I was on the freeway, came to a park. I basically parked. Someone hit me at full force while I was parked on the freeway. Ended up having a bunch of injuries, crushed like 3 discs in my neck, tore labrum in my right shoulder, complicated more injuries that I had with surgeries in my back. And at that point, I had realized, like, I do not want to go down the Western path, allopathic medicine. Like, I've had enough experience now with the healing from, the emotional traumas, that I know I can do more healing with my physical body. And I ended up being introduced to Dr. Bruce Lipton. And I think Dr. Bruce Lipton is probably one of the better pioneers on the epigenetics. I think he used to be the head of the Cancer Institute. I'm trying to think what the name of it is. But he started to realize that genes could be turned off and on, and that was something that was exteriorly happening. It wasn't internally happening with the genes, which like a lot of biology teaches. And so I started going through a lot of his research and being able to learn more about epigenetics. And then that kind of helped pair with some of the neuroscience and the quantum physics. I think another doctor or another guy that's done a lot of great work that has some interesting books is Joe Dispenza is one of the other people that has some interesting information and that links together well with Bruce Lipton. He has some hard science that goes with it, and some of his books now are a little further away from the academic side of things. But I think those two authors are really some of the best places to look that merge those sciences together. And Joe Dispenza has a lot of monitoring tools that in a state of meditation, once you pass the analytical mind, you can achieve this thing called the heart-brain coherence. And once you achieve this heart-brain coherence through meditation, everything, basically all the neurons in your brain light up at once, and they're all able to communicate and talk. And it's when you're in that space is when you're able to start using different types of archetypes to create these epigenetic effects of what you want to be and what you're looking to do, whether it's you're wanting to heal, you're wanting to create something out of this quantum space. They call it the quantum field, that there's an infinite amount of possibilities. And it's when you're in that space that you're able to take energy out of there and start to rewrite these programs that we've put into our physical bodies. And the more that you do it, the more that the hardware is rewritten with this software upgrade.
How has it helped you regarding PTSD?
That's been the big thing. That's originally kind of where I didn't understand how it all worked at first through the meditation. But the meditation is really the key, more than anything, that helps keep all of that at bay. It puts me in this space that just it's like it zeroes out all of the energies that I'm just like absorbing, because it's become very clear over time that I am a very highly sensitive person to just subtle energies in general. But the meditation helps clear out all those energies, so I'm not harboring so many in my emotional and my psychic bodies, which end up creating issues in my physical body. And it's kind of like a cup. If you're filled with all these energies and it's just overflowing, you can have these continual problems. But once that cup kind of gets lowered down, you're emptying out from time to time, all those problems are not mounting and overflowing. They're kind of put in an equilibrium check and balance system. And that's what meditation basically does for me.
Yeah, I think it does the same thing for me. I've been practicing transcendental meditation for a number of years now, and I would describe it the same way. I would say that all of the things that used to bother me, all like the little itty bitty things, they've completely disappeared. And if meditation has done anything for me, it's helped me improve my decision making, and it has helped me out when the shit hits the fan. I seem to be a lot calmer in those moments and not as revved up. I don't know that you practice meditation, but Dave, give me your take on, maybe from the brain side of things, what's happening here.
Yeah, you're increasing your reserve for stress. I mean, that's an easy way to understand it. So when you have an acute stress, you release adrenaline, right? So somebody, starts to run through a stop sign as you're driving down the road, you slam on the brakes, right? You get that jolt, right? Nobody was hurt, right? You stopped in time. Maybe you had some choice words for the person that gave you the good scare, but nobody got hurt, right? So you still have this huge dump of adrenaline, which is part of the fight or flight response. When you're dealing with chronic stresses, right? So life-threatening situations day in and day out, that constant elevation of adrenaline then leads to elevations in cortisol. So cortisol is like the chronic stress hormone. And then cortisol, when you talk about epigenetics, cortisol has a lot of effects on gene expression elsewhere, and reprioritizes the body's resources, and oftentimes will lead to suppression of the immune system and other problems. So, if you don't get a handle on dealing with your chronic stresses, PTSD runs rampant. And then it just becomes this endless cycle of not sleeping well, being constantly keyed up, being overreactive to things, right? So the meditation, you're teaching yourself how to relax in a deep way. And you're learning how to get your body to unwind some of that stress in the moment. And then as you do it and as you practice it, it starts to have those effects on the chronic stress hormones, and then the ripple effect throughout the entire body in terms of your immune system and everything else. Yeah. So, and like I said, I think the best way to understand it is increases your reserve, right? So if you're dealing with chronic stress, if one more little thing happens, you have no reserve. So when you hear about people having trouble with anger, a lot of folks with PTSD, they fly off the handle quickly, right? Your wife in the other room drops something and the sudden noise, and now you're screaming and making threatening statements just because of a noise. Like, that doesn't make sense. That's like way out of proportion. But it's because there's no runway, there's no reserve left, right? So you're at like 95%, and that one little thing puts you over 5%. But if your baseline stress level is 20 and that 5% happens, well, you're 25. Okay, fine. You still have plenty of room to go.
I want to ask you something, Jacob. You wrote to us that it's been quite a turnaround from the times of being on your deathbed, or the heavy toll of combat traumas and what that took on you and your immediate family. Would you mind talking to us just briefly about going through the transition of dealing with the immediate family? Because there's so many folks that we've encountered along the way where, you can sit and spend a lot of time on, man, I was such a shitty person. I was so mean to people. I was so this, I was so that. I wish I could have done this better. Will you talk a little bit about how you have cycled through maybe repairing the relationships that got a little dinged up during those hard 5 years for you?
Yeah, they got more than dinged up. I literally ruined every single relationship that I have. It got so bad that it got to the point that basically the only people that even wanted to talk to me were my parents and my brother, but that was just because they were family. And so when it got low, it got as low as you could possibly go. But one day at a time, things, I was doing the work, in the early years, it was with the VA and, the psychological side of things, and things did slowly get better, but it wasn't an overnight fix. And it took days, months, and, we're at years now. And because it has progressed as fast as it has, and I've done as much as I could, as soon as possible, those changes were seen by the family. And of course, people outside of my immediate family who didn't know me before just knows the person that, I am today, or I was in the process going through. And so they had a different experience of who I was versus what my parents was. And in saying that, it took longer for my parents to come, or even my family to come to the realization of who I have become versus who I was. And one of the things that, one of the things I'll never forget is that my dad, I remember he had said, I got to the point where I was doing Ironman triathlons. I was going to school full time. And he had pulled me aside and said, you know what? He's like, your mom and I are absolutely amazed. He's like, things were really bad in like 2008. He's like, your mom and I had a conversation where we just came to the realization of like, you were never going to come back, that, we had to write you off as a casualty of war because you were just so far gone. And he said, I'm blown away that you've been able to come back this far and you are who you are today. And that was still probably only 50% of like what I've even got to today. And just in that amount of time, like when you make those changes and you're growing, you're learning, you're applying what you're learning, people take notice and they see that, and you just continue to grow. And I feel like those relationships, when you want to make them better, you naturally take steps to make them better as time goes on. And that was one of the things, repairing those relationships was crucially important to me, because they were there for me when nobody else was. Through all the thick and the thin. And a lot of it, I still guarded a lot of information because of the missions that we were on and the things that we did, that I still didn't feel comfortable sharing things. Of course, they knew about the deaths, kind of the big things, but the things that were the most traumatic to me, those moral and ethical traumas, those were things that I didn't start sharing until after the second murder trial. And more as the years went on, where it was just like, it got to the point where I had healed enough. I was like, I don't care what I say against, CIA or JSOC or anything. It doesn't matter to me anymore. Like, if something is going to happen, something happens. It is what it is. But I'm not going to cave to fear anymore. Like, I am going to embrace the opposite of fear, which is courage. And, I will boldly, I will speak the truth when I am asked to. And I think that switch of choosing to embrace courage over fear, and, let the cards fall where they will. As I continued to move forward, it was seen with the family. And now it's at the point where, my family is absolutely blown away with what I have done and where I'm at and where I'm continuing to go. At this point, it's very clear that these traumas that I was so angry with for so many years for having to experience, now I can truly honestly say, like, because I have faced them head on and have learned to turn all of that negativity into a positive, like, it definitely has become a superpower.
100%. We talked about it in the onset of the podcast before we even started recording. It's like, what you're able to do for a living now is help people make decisions when things are kind of at their most difficult stage of the game. Who better for the job than somebody like you, who had to make decisions constantly while things were incredibly difficult? Like, it literally has turned into the superpower that's going to get you paid and going to, provide for you and your family moving forward. But I do want to ask one more question, and I would love for you to speak directly to people who have been in the darkness for a long time and maybe spent more than a few years in the darkness. And they really are at that point that you and I have in common, which is, I'll never be happy again. Things will never get right again. There will never be a moment where I feel like I used to again. What would you share with somebody who had that attitude right here, right now?
Persevere more than anything. There really isn't any, I don't think there's an easy, what I would say is an easy way out of it, other than you continue to persevere. The steps will be revealed for you that are needed to be taken in order for you to learn the lessons and grow. And so in those dark spaces, like, you are being taught a lesson. And instead of asking, why is this happening to me? A better way to look at it is, what lesson do I need to learn from this experience? And using that to persevere and move forward, because we are all here to learn lessons. And a lot of the times those lessons will continue to beat us over the head until we learn what it is. And so I think it's really, instead of, there's a big victim mentality and asking why this is happening to me. But for me, reframing here now, what lesson is it that I need to learn? That's how I approach everything these days, is figuring out what lesson it is to learn, persevere, learn the lesson, and move forward. And it might sound very basic, or for some people might be even difficult to hear when you're in those deep, dark spaces. But persevering and continuing to move forward is going to be one step closer to getting to that light at the end of the tunnel. And it is there, and you can make it. It's just a matter of choosing to take the steps necessary to go forward.
How does that sit with you, Dave?
You have to let go of any expectations.
Absolutely.
If you think that things ought to be a certain way, or I'm this age and I should be doing this, that, and the other thing by now. You have to let all of that go. Should is a word that needs to be eliminated. You have to stop shooting on yourself.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. Maybe that would be the title of this episode. Stop shooting on yourself.
But what you were saying about persevering, I think military training, and especially when you're in a special forces realm, you expect instant results. You've done the training and you've gotten up to a certain point, and you expect that you should be able to, follow a plan and get something done quickly. That's not the answer here. The answer here is small improvements, small steps over time. Keep a sense of curiosity. Try different things. Embrace failure as just another learning opportunity. You try something, hey, it didn't work out. Okay, let's take a step back, take a deep breath. Let's retool. Let's try something a little different. And it's those little steps forward, consistently done. If you find something that works, stick with it and do that every day. And it's the accumulation of those little steps over a period of time. Eventually you start seeing real growth. But it's like watching paint dry, like watching grass grow. You can stare at it and you don't really see that anything's happening. You have to kind of just keep at it and look back at intervals, not get upset or try to do something radically different if it's just not working after a week or month or a couple months.
Isn't it also true, Dave, something that you say all the time, which is you've already paid the price. Like you've already gone through most of the hardest stuff. And so see it through. Yeah.
You paid the tuition. Why not learn the lesson?
It's a good way to say it.
Right. Yeah. No. And it's so perfect to hear it that way, because that can be the light bulb that goes on for somebody. It's like you already went through all the hard stuff. So now practice, learn, grow, do all the things. And I think if there's any message that screams at me, Jacob, for you and your stories, you're just somebody who never stopped moving. You literally persevered. You just, it was like, all right, I'm going to try the VA. Okay, it doesn't work. I'm going to try this spiritual journey. I'm going to be a Catholic. Okay, I'm going to go be Buddhist. Okay, I'm going to go try this. You just never stopped moving until you found something that eventually landed with you, right?
But I would even say each step along the way, you picked up some things. It just wasn't the complete picture,
And I think that's really the key that you really hit on there, Dr. Dave, is there were lessons that I learned throughout the process, and there was no one shot that fixed everything. And I think that was the part about expectations you mentioned. My expectation was that I was looking for that one pill, or just, it's just one thing that's going to fix all of it. And it never happened like that. And I didn't even learn the expectation lesson until it was probably like on the Buddhist side of things, it was these expectations that literally I created this personal torture chamber based on my expectations. Once I detached from those expectations, it was like stepping out of the torture chamber. And I was the one that locked myself in there because of those expectations.
Man, we have learned from people who lived it today. I mean, honestly, thank you so much, Jacob. He wrote to us in kind of the back and forth that we do before we get the guests on the show. And he said, where our mind goes, energy flows. So the only barrier to healing is what we believe in our heart and our minds, because our bodies merely receive the programming codes from our systems of belief. Then our body acts according to the codes. And when I read that, I thought one thing. Now, after talking to you, I think the same thing, and I feel even stronger about it. You completely have rewritten your codes in a way where it's working for you now.
Absolutely. It definitely is. And anybody can do it. I'm telling you, anyone can do it. Put it into practice and persevere.
Closing thoughts from you, Dr. Dave.
Yeah, when you put the time into the process, you become much better than you ever imagined yourself being. There's no end to where you can go.
Yeah. And, I think people really overestimate what they can do in a year and they underestimate what they can do in 5 or 10 years.
That's the truth. Final thoughts from you, Jacob, as we wrap up, anything that you haven't said here today that you were hoping to?
Persevere is a thing that just continually is coming to mind right now. Yeah. As long as you continue to persevere and make the choice to live and to move forward on a daily basis, those steps will be revealed. You will eventually learn the lessons, and you will be better off for them in the end.
Well, thank you, everybody, for spending a little time with us today. Jacob Wagner, appreciate your time. Dr. David Lykin, always appreciate your time. And we'll see everybody next time here on Learn from People Who Lived It. Have a great day, everyone.
Hey, take care, all.
Thank you.
We have 3 goals with Learn from People Who Lived It. 1, to help you feel less alone. 2, encourage you to seek out a coach, a therapist, a church, anyone who can help you get through your journey and find some healing. 3, when you're ready, share your story with us.
Find Learn from People Who Lived It wherever you get podcasts. Search it using all one word. Learn from People Who Lived It.